Hi everyone, this is Alan Strange. We're here at the PCA General Assembly, and it's good to be here with Kevin DeYoung, and we thank you, Kevin, for coming by and talking a little bit with us. Kevin is involved with many things throughout the church, and he's particularly excited and has encouraged Crossway to do a little bit with my dissertation that I published with P&R. And what drew you to the dissertation? How did you become interested in that?
I love reading dissertations.
Hey, I like this, man.
No, yours was really good. So I've had an interest in religion and politics, and so I've had an interest in the doctrine of the spirituality of the church. And I mean, you know this because you're the expert, but most people hear spirituality of the church and they think, oh, that's what those guys in the 19th century used so they didn't have to deal with slavery in the South.
That's right.
And it's true, some people did, and
there was that abuse.
It was an abuse, but that's the key. It was an abuse of a doctrine that was much older than that.
Right.
And so I was really drawn to your work. I've recommended it really lots of times to people. I've referenced it in things I've written online because you did a great job of unpacking some of the history of it. And then you dealt in particular with some of the 19th century stuff with Hodge, but just showing why the doctrine's important. Yes, it can be abused, but if we throw it overboard from our Reformed and Presbyterian history, we're really losing something that's important to us as churchmen. So really, I want to thank you for it. It was really well done.
I appreciate your use of it and your encouragement of people. Maybe I should just remind our listeners that the dissertation, I don't think everybody has it on the tip of their tongue. The dissertation is on the doctrine of the spirituality of the church in the ecclesiology of Charles Hodge. And what I did in the dissertation, just to let you know a little bit about what Kevin is talking about, is I looked at, you might say, a kind of moderate view of it.
Right.
Originally, when Hodge encountered it with Thornwell, he was concerned that it was something that was narrow and would put a muzzle on the prophetic voice of the church, he said. But particularly in the 1861 General Assembly, he came to appreciate it more when Gardner Spring issued brought forth a resolution basically asking the General Assembly to go on record, in a sense, supporting the federal union, which is to say supporting the Lincoln administration.
Yeah.
And Hodge made it very clear in his speeches, I'm a Lincoln man. I support, as a political matter, the federal government, but I don't think the church, as the church, is either authorized or competent to engage this question. It's a political question. And by doing what we're doing here and saying we support the federal government, we're deciding the political question. And the political question is being contested with a war right now.
Right.
And the church, right now the church is one church. The Presbyterian Church was still united. And we have Southern representatives of that church here. And it's really, this isn't what the church as the church should be doing.
Right.
So, and you've gotten an appreciation of that.
Well, it was really helpful, and as you know, I mean, Hodge was a moderate opponent of slavery, moving more towards more strongly opposed to it. I mean,
he was an emancipationist, not an abolitionist.
That's right. That's a good way of putting it. And so, he'll say, I'm not opposed to the church making statements that are, quote, political, insofar as they have direct scriptural warrants. So it's one thing to make a statement in the 19th century about chattel slavery being wrong,
which the 1818 General Assembly had said was wrong and should be abolished.
That's right. It's another thing, going back to those Gardner Spring resolutions, to say, and consequently, this is the political administration, or this is the way that it ought to be done. And there's always that temptation, because the matters always seem really important, and they are important, and Christians should be involved, and we do want Christians thinking about these things, but the church as the church, to say, this is therefore what it means to be a Christian. So, I mean, Machen famously in the OPC did this. or you have to remind me if it was before there was the OPC, but when he wouldn't agree to the statement that Christians should support prohibition. And he said, whether or not I do or not personally.
That was before the OPC.
Yeah, right.
When the OPC came, prohibition had ended.
That's right, in the 30s, and then Machen didn't last too much longer, sadly. So, and that's been a good model too that has largely been lost on a lot of people.
And the idea was, Hodge and others had it, was that if something that the church said, which was according to the Word of God, and thus was a statement about, say, the immorality of something.
Right.
Like we would talk about the immorality of abortion or same-sex marriage. We would be concerned about these things. But we don't address them in the first instance because we're trying to make a political point. We're being faithful to God's Word.
Right.
And if in being faithful to God's Word, there's political implications or consequences, then come what may.
Right.
But so part of the problem was in the Old South there was such a sensitivity to not address slavery in a way that would upset the apple cart that things that should have been addressed sometimes didn't get addressed. And so, but that doesn't mean, as we often say in Presbyterianism and good church polity, a little Latin here, abusus non tollit usum. The abuse of something doesn't mean there's not a proper use.
Right.
And that's what I would like to see us recapture, because I think we're in a bit of danger in our churches in certain quarters, whether it's on the right or left, of overly politicizing, thinking that the church is in a sense the Republican or the Democratic Party at prayer, rather than understanding the kind of institution. The church is a kingdom not of this world that comes into this world and has something to say to this world nobody else has to say. And if the church doesn't mind its spiritual business in that sense and stick to it, the gospel message is lost. That Christ said, bring this to the world.
And you said it really well earlier, when the church has neither the authority nor the competence, both of those things. So good Reformed polity has thought a lot about the nature of church power, and in what does the church's power consist, on what sort of topics does the church have the right to speak authoritatively. So it's the authority and also just the competence. So I'm in the PCA now, but I come out of a denomination in their Christian Social Action Committee was always making very definitive, minute statements about the church should make this declaration about the type of weapons that should no longer be available under gun control, and this is what the minimum wage should be, and all these things, which are really prudential questions, which we should not say the Christian church doesn't have the authority, and we don't have the competence. We're simply not experts in these things as the church.
It's similar. The stated clerk of the mainline Presbyterian Church, that office speaks in almost exhaustive detail, if I could use that, about all sorts of social issues, which I happen to know people in that church, I think, rightly differ on. And I've had people on the right do the same kind of thing. I've had people on the right say, well, the Bible is a detailed blueprint for all of life. Well, even in the Old Testament, water rights never get addressed. So you even think about, was it a blueprint, a detailed blueprint for everything? No, that wasn't its purpose. And so, we don't want the church to politicize and become another political agency. I think Martin Lloyd-Jones, many people have gotten at this. Martin Lloyd-Jones said, the church does the world the least good when it seeks to be most like it. And I think that's a reflection of the same kind of thing that we're trying to say here. So, you've been very supportive in this, and you've talked to Crossway, and tell us about that.
Yes, I'm really excited that you're working on this, Alan. So it's been something I've thought about, written about, but you've done so much more work on it, and I was actually I've been asked different places, different publishers even, would you write something about the spirituality of the church? And I always had in my mind, somebody really needs to do something at a level that a church person could read but is thoughtful, and I thought, I know I'm not the best person to do it. So now you're doing it, and you really are a great person to do it because you have this expertise in it. And I know your heart too is to write it in such a way, really introducing the doctrine to a lot of people for the first time, helping to clear up some abuses and misconceptions. Because I think even in the PCA, where everyone kind of knows the term, a lot of people are going to say, ooh, spirituality of the church.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't want to own that. That's just what Thornwell and Dabney did.
Right. It has to be recovered.
Yeah, it does.
For our time, I think, and reconceived, and we've got to think carefully. And part of what I'm doing, I want to do in the book, just so everybody's clear, I've signed a contract with Crossway, and Kevin has been a great supporter of this, with Crossway to write a book on the doctrine of the spirituality of the church, basically taking the message of the dissertation, which is 400 plus pages, and bringing it down to under 150 pages, a much shorter version that the person in the pew could read and profit by. And I've been in dialogue with him, and Justin Taylor is very excited and saying this is something that we at Crossway think should be said, needs to be said, needs to be made clear. And you can all pray that I will do so. We academics sometimes can get a little verbose, but I have my limits, and I'm seeking to work with some excellent editors
they're great.
there
and I know they're really excited about it.
To bring this to a bunch of folk. You know, Hodge, let me just say this, particularly saw after the war what happened in the reunion of the old and new school churches in the North in 1869. Hodge was very concerned that the reunion of the old and new schools was on a political basis.
Yeah.
Because they had fought the war together against the South, and they were saying, well, whatever divides us is no longer important, but there was still some questions about, well, what do we really understand about the atonement? Is a moral government theory of the atonement okay, or do we think it's a propitiatory substitutionary atonement? You know, what do we think about the headship of Adam? Is there anything there? And so Hodge said, we need to come back on a proper doctrinal basis. But what was being said at the point was, doctrine doesn't matter. Doctrine just divides us. I mean, we fought a war together. That's more important. We're in union. And Hodge said, I want union more than anything. I want church union, but I want it to be on the right basis. I don't want it to be just on the basis of kind of, we have the same political views.
Because this is bound to happen, because those issues are so strongly felt, and they're important. A lot of people hear this as, oh, you don't think those are important, or you don't think Christians should be able. No, they really should be, and we need people as Christians engaged in them. But what happens is you find these co-belligerents, and that's good in the civic realm, but then because you feel like you have this political alignment, and we can easily see the dangers in our own day, and both the right and the left, you have a political alignment, you see the political questions the same, therefore the theological questions become moot, and you lose what God really put the church on the earth to do.
And politics too easily becomes paramount. And in our churches, it can be on either side of the spectrum. There are people who may be listening to a certain strand of talk radio, and they want everything in the church to conform to that, and that becomes more important. Your political position, I once got in a little hot water because I said, but to make a point, I said, you know, sometimes in the church, and I was saying in our church, in this church, we may be more concerned, I was preaching on the second commandment, we may be more concerned about the second amendment than the second commandment. But that's a point that needs to be made. That's a spirituality of the church point, because people, it's interesting when you talk about the Second Amendment, because Christians in other countries have different views about this, and a lot of Christians in this country on the right have a hard time even understanding that. But this helps situate all of that. This helps situate, and it's really better for being world Christians, if I can put it this way. And it's better for the whole mission of the church throughout the world, because the church can too easily take on just an American cast, or even an imperialistic kind of cast, and we're trying to make other people, you know, our missions in American churches, we're trying to make them American Christians. No, we're not. We want to bring the gospel, and we want people, because Revelation tells us every tribe and kindred and tongue and nation, right? It's a great panoply of people that God brings together. And I like to say, you know, we have more in common, we who sit here in this body, we have more in common when real Christians in China or India or anywhere than we do with our fellow Americans who don't know Jesus, who don't love Jesus, who don't serve Him, even if we have a lot of political agreement with them. And, you know, and that challenges people. But right now we're getting a lot of challenge in some of our churches from the left. And the left has about it, and has always had about it, an extreme sense of its own righteousness. And an intolerance of any other kind of a thing, you know, sort of shutting conversations down. And so this spirituality church, I think, would help us to refocus about the church. And just to say, and I appreciate your saying that Christians, as Christians, we're called to be involved in all of life.
Right.
All of life is a religion. We believe that. And Kuyper was clear on this. Kuyper said things that are very much in the direction of, he didn't call it that, what we call the spirituality of the church, because he appreciated the separation of church and state. He wanted a free university, a free, right?
Yeah.
A free church. And he really talks about this and sees the church as institute, and that's what we're talking about, is something that must be properly preserved and maintained as the church, whereas the church as organism is involved in all sorts of things.
Right.
And you can even have Christian political parties and labor unions and all sorts of things that are working in Christian ways. I will say this about Kuyper. I think sometimes he might have emphasized the church's organism a little bit too much over the church's institute. I do think we want to maintain a good, vigorous view of the church as institute, of the church as church.
Right.
I think this age needs it. If this age doesn't need something, is just another social political agency. We got tons of those.
Right.
We need an agency that truly is divine, the church, and is calling us all to what we ought to be. So
I'm really excited for your book. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for working on it. Blessings on it. I know those word limits are a gift and a blessing, but they're tight sometimes.
My wife would tell you it's just what he needs.
Yes, it was very good. No, I really am looking forward to it. I'm glad. I know I got a lot of friends at Crossway, and they're really excited for you working on it.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for coming by, for taking a little time.
Glad to.
PCA General Assembly is about to start in earnest.
I know. Very
worship
soon.
service electing a moderator.
Yep.
And you'll be off to the races. And God's blessing on the work of this body.
Thanks. And God bless you on what you're doing at Mid-America.
Thank you.
Read books from you, from President Venema, from lots of your folks. Read your journal. I was born just right over the border in South Holland, as you know, so keep up the good work.
Thank you.